Hello listeners and fellow internet explorers. Welcome to TheHorrorPatch. We feature stories of the strange and the unexplainable for your enjoyment. These allegedly true stories can be submitted to the email address listed in the details section of the video. We look forward to reading your letters and we want to share your experiences with the world. Some of these tales can be taken as pure entertainment, but others may in fact be a glimpse into the other side. Like and subscribe if you approve of the content, and we hope that you enjoy the ride. Game over. This story takes place when I was 13 years old. It was a cold wintry night. I was spending my time sitting in front of my bedroom TV, pounding out some super combos in Street Fighter. A few minutes into Hadouken and Chill, I heard a knock on my window behind me. I didn't even turn around. It must have been a tree branch or something because I was on the second floor. There was little to no way that a person could have been there, so honestly, the noise didn't even faze me. I kept playing like nothing was wrong, but a few minutes later, I heard another knock at the window. From where I was sitting, my back was to the window, so I didn't have a good line of sight. To get a better look, I twisted my body around as much as I could, but I really couldn't get a good view of what was going on out there. When I finished the round, I decided to get up and check things out. I walked towards the window. It was a large sliding glass door, but there was no balcony or deck. There was a railing so that there was no fear of falling, but past the railing, there was a 2-story drop with a lovely sidewalk to break your fall. The bottom line is, there was no way someone was out there, but I continued to check anyway. I approached the door and slid back the blinds. It was dark outside, but a dim streetlight partially illuminated the area. I stood there for a few seconds, but as expected, there was nothing to be seen. I checked to make sure the door was closed and locked, closed the blinds, and went back to gaming. A minute or two later, I heard the knock again, but I wasn't getting fooled this time. I didn't even look back. I knew there was nothing there, so I just kept playing. Another few minutes goes by, and another knock. Then a few minutes more, and yet another. What was going on out there? I said to myself. I continued to ignore it because I absolutely knew no one was out there. About 5 knocks in, the knock changed to a thump. This sound was different, and now it had my attention once again. Maybe something was out there. My absolution that it was my imagination started to fade. I ignored it again, but deep down, I was starting to feel some type of way about what I was hearing. Then, instead of a knock or a thump, there was a laugh. It was a laugh of an older woman, like a grandmother. It was warm and lighthearted and almost playful, and it was most certainly coming from the window behind me. At that exact moment, my room got cold. It felt like the large sliding glass door behind me was now open. The air had changed. Have you ever gotten the feeling when laying in bed that something is in the room with you? Something staring at you from a dark corner or hovering over you as you slept? That's what I felt. I felt a presence as if someone was there in the room with me. A gust of freezing wind rushed through the room. It was strong enough that the cold air slammed my bedroom door shut. I heard the laugh again, but this time it was directly behind me, right over my left shoulder. Whatever or whoever it was inside, and it was close. I was terrified and frozen. After a few seconds, I sprung up from the floor and darted to the door. My heart was racing and I lunged for the doorknob. I turned the knob and started to open it. I got it open partially, but then it slammed shut again. This time it wasn't from the wind. The laughing specter was behind me, and I felt its arm reach above my head and push the door closed. I didn't look back, I was too scared. My hands were trembling and I was gasping for air. I tried to scream out to my parents, but all that came out was a soft whimper. The voice behind me continued to laugh. It didn't sound like an evil laugh. It was still playful and warm-hearted, but its actions proved otherwise. I frantically grabbed at the doorknob, but now it was locked. The ominous laughing continued relentlessly. I managed to unlock the door, but I couldn't turn the knob. The whole time I kept trying to call out, but I could not find my voice. Every time I twisted the knob, I felt something turning in the opposite direction. Something was fighting with me. When I finally managed to open the door for a second time, it was again pushed shut on me. The laugh continued. I gave up on trying to scream for help, so I started pounding on the door. Hopefully my mother and father would hear it and help me break free. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened. It was my father, and he had this odd smile on his face. He hadn't heard the door slam, my screams, or even my pounding on the door. He was simply coming to say hi and play a quick game. He saw my face, the tears rolling down my eyes, and my hands shaking in fear. He asked me what was wrong, but I still couldn't voice words. I managed to turn and point towards the window. I looked back at it, and the blinds were swaying like something just rushed through them. My dad walked over to the door. It was still closed and locked from the inside. Whatever that thing was, it was gone. For now. My dad was acting weird. It's almost like he enjoyed seeing me act as a child even though I was growing up. He gave me a pat on the back and tucked me into bed. I guess he figured I was just a scared kid whose imagination got the better of him. But that wasn't the case. There was something in the room with me that night. I don't know if I was in any immediate danger, but something was having fun at my expense. The next morning, I asked my father about what happened, and he didn't even remember coming to check on me, nor did he remember putting me to bed the night before. He swore up and down that he didn't come to my room that night, and that he had no idea what I was talking about. I hope whatever was in the room with me got a kick out of my terror. I'll never forget that night, the laugh, or the feeling of helplessness that poured over my body. As I sat and played video games, I guess something wanted to play a game of their own with me that night. What happened? What was in the room with me? I don't think I'll ever know the truth. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was dreaming or something. All I know is that I never felt comfortable in that room ever again. Anytime I played Street Fighter from that day forward, I had to make sure I had a good view of all the windows. I have been practicing my combos ever since, and I'll be ready for you next time, Ghost. I'll be ready. The Loch Raven Graveyard. The story that you're about to hear is true. I have never spoken a word to anyone regarding the events that took place in my life during the summer of 1995. The memories of this experience have haunted my dreams, and I have lost days or even weeks of sleep in my life thinking about it over the years. What happened was so unexplainable that I was sure that no one would believe the encounter that fractured my reality as I had known it. One sunny and beautiful day, two of my friends and I decided to hop on our bicycles and go exploring. We were at that age where we were pushing our childhood boundaries and were venturing further and further away from our neighborhoods. As long as we were able to get back before the streetlights turned on, we continuously challenged ourselves to forge deeper and deeper into our newly discovered world. When it came to our adventures, we explored the woods, the cities, the farmlands, the scary parts of town, all of it. We were fearless, and on this day, we were heading west. Today was the day that we crossed the bridge. We had found the bridge a few weeks prior, and we knew that we had to go back. We set out at sunrise since it was quite a distance for us to ride. After a long trek, we finally arrived at the old railroad viaduct that led to the dense forest. We had no idea what was on the other side of that bridge, but we were going to find out. It was an old bridge, and it most certainly looked like it had been retired. The tracks were overgrown with vegetation, so it was clear that the railway hadn't been active for some time. After crossing the bridge, we entered into the deep woods on the other side of the tracks. We had now been further away from home than any of us had ever been before. We explored deeper and deeper into the woods. About a mile in, we found a gate that had been chain closed to a small run of fence. It looked as though the gate was sealing off an old fire trail that would typically cut through a heavily wooded area. There was a sign on the fence that read, Loch Raven Reservoir, no trespassing. We were good kids, but there was no way a sign was going to end this journey. We hopped the fence, tossed the bikes over the gate, and we continued on. About a mile into the woods, the canopies of trees vanished and we emerged from the forest into a vast field with rolling hills. Where were we? I said to myself. My friend Danny, who was a few feet in front of us, shouted, "What the heck is that?" and pointed into the distance. From where we were, we couldn't tell. It seemed to look like a random brick wall atop of a distant hill that honestly had no business being there. There were no houses in any direction, and other than a few deer that we spotted on the way, there were zero signs of life. We immediately and without discussion headed for the suspicious structure to check it out. It was a graveyard, and it was old. It was fairly small. I believe we counted 30 or so headstones, and the walls were only about 4 feet high. Many of the markers were not legible after years of decay and wear. Some weren't marked at all. The memorials that could be read were dated in the 1840s, so who knows how old the rest of them were. The thing that stood out the most to me was the grass. The grass inside of the walled area was short and well kempt, while the rolling hills surrounding the site were densely overgrown. As someone who was forced to mow my lawn as a child, I could tell that someone was taking care of this particular spot. Another oddity to point out is that there were no road or even paths leading to the area. Standing atop the hills, we could see for miles around, and we were most certainly alone. We were basking in the fact that we were both super far from home, and also that we found this really cool spot that not many people probably knew about. We climbed atop the short walls of the graveyard and tight-roped around the perimeter. We were respectful of the plot, and honestly, we were just trying to get a better look around. We stopped to hang out at the site for a little while, but it was getting late, so it was about time to head back. Right before we called it a day, my friend thought it would be funny to push Danny into the graveyard. As soon as Danny landed on the grass, I heard someone from the tree line yell out, "Hey!" "Did you hear that?" I said. But of course, Robbie was too busy laughing, and Danny was cursing and trying to climb out of the site as if his life depended on it. Neither of them heard the cry. I definitely heard someone. "Let's get out of here," I said, and we grabbed our bikes and started riding as fast as we could into the woods. It didn't seem like my friends were convinced that we were in danger, but I was, and I wanted out of there. I left the guys in the dust. I don't think my legs ever pedaled faster than they did that day. I was a good 200 yards ahead of them, and I was not slowing down. I sprinted on my Huffy for as long as I could. I got to that fence in record time. I figured that if the person I heard was on foot, I had created plenty of distance between us by now. It seemed like a good place to pause and wait for my friends, which should only be a minute or two behind me. I waited for what seemed like 30 minutes, but they never came. I was already scared before this, but by now, I was starting to get a little worried. While I was waiting, I was looking around and I noticed something. There was no sign. The sign that said Loch Raven Reservoir was missing. I realized I was at the wrong gate, and now I was lost alone in the woods. I must have made a wrong turn somewhere in my hasty escape. If I can get back to the train tracks, I knew I could eventually get back to that bridge, and then home. I threw my bike over the gate and I was quickly tossing myself over right after it. I landed on my feet, but I was standing on something. It was rolling around and it was really hard to keep my balance. I looked down and it was a large black garbage bag. As I tried to get my balance, the tied end of the bag came open, so ready or not, I hopped off. As I'm picking up my bike, I looked back at the bag to see what was in it. It was bones. The entire bag was filled with bones. As soon as I realized what it was, I heard someone yell, "Hey!" It was the same Hey from the graveyard, and whoever it was, they were very, very close. I hopped on my bike and I hit the train tracks. I wasn't sure if I was going the right way, but it didn't matter. I was riding for my life. I was terrified and my entire body was trembling. I put my head down and once again I pedaled as fast as I could. Eventually I got back to the bridge where I found Danny and Robbie waiting for me. Thank God I went in the right direction on the train tracks. I was safe. At least, safer than I was. Even after all of this, I tried to convince myself that it was all my imagination. I didn't want to expose the fact that I was scared in front of my friends because I know I would never hear the end of it. I tried to hide my fear and brush it off quickly before they noticed. When they asked me where I had gone, I was speechless. I didn't want to even talk about what I saw. I just wanted to get home as fast as possible. I told them I took a wrong turn. Hopefully they would leave it at that. I capped it off with a reminder that it was getting late, and we really had to get back, or else we were all going to be in trouble. On the ride home, I was starting to level out and get a hold of myself. Maybe everything I heard and experienced wasn't real. I had pretty much convinced myself by that time that I was just crazy and hearing things. That was, of course, until April 7th, 1997, the Baltimore Sun published an article about a 31-year-old local man that was formerly being indicted for the murders at Loch Reservoir. In fact, there were many other articles around the same time as my experience, citing multiple instances of people seeing and hearing forest phantoms. Was this the guy? Were they as close to death as my friends and I were? Was this the same person that was neatly tending to the gravesite that we found? Were those human bones in that bag that I saw? From that day forward, I knew I wasn't crazy. I don't know exactly who or what was stalking me that day, but I wasn't alone in those woods. I never did tell my friends about what happened to me when I got lost. I never spoke to anyone about the bag or the voice. I was content to just leave the whole thing in the past. I guess the moral of the story is that no trespassing signs are hung for a reason. Maybe it's best to just explore somewhere else. The Man in Black. This story dates back to my younger years. I grew up in a small suburb of Queens called South Ozone Park. It was a fairly safe community considering the state of the New York streets in the late 1980s. It was quiet and neighborly, and I have a lot of fond memories of my childhood there. My best friend was named Alex, and he lived in the house next to mine. Since we weren't allowed to leave the street that we lived on without our parents, we spent a lot of time at each other's houses. I liked going over to Alex's house because his father was an entertainer. He used to dress up in costumes like Batman and other superheroes for kids' parties and events. We always had fun trying on his dad's costumes and pretending that we were going to save the world one day. Alex's dad was a large fellow. I guess that physical attribute helped convince the kids that he was really Captain America, even though he showed up in their tiny backyard in Brooklyn or in their grandmother's living room in Staten Island. When I was around 7 years old, I was preparing to make my first Holy Communion in my neighborhood church. My mother was very religious, and despite my skepticism at even a young age, I knew it was something that I had to do to make her happy. I was raised Italian Catholic, so I didn't have much choice in the matter anyway. When the day finally came, it was a grand event filled with ceremony and celebration. My mother threw a huge party to celebrate the solemn rite of passage, and you could tell that she couldn't be more proud. The reception hall was filled with aunts, uncles, the random estranged cousin, and some of my closest friends and classmates. Alex couldn't make it to the party. His family was out of town at the time. But considering how close we were, his parents sent a gift to me anyway. The gift was the largest bundle of balloons I had ever seen in my life, and it was amazing. All shapes and sizes were accounted for in the assortment. There were so many balloons that when I was holding it, it actually lifted my arm into the sky. It took the majority of my 7-year-old muscles to keep the bunch under control. I immediately started daydreaming of putting on one of Alex's dad's superhero costumes and floating around the city stopping crime. My entire future flashed before my eyes. The main driver for that was this gargantuan cluster of helium-filled foil and latex lifting me into the atmosphere. I don't remember any other gifts that I received that day except for this one. I'm not sure if that's because of how enamored I was with the present, or because of what happened next. After a long day, we finally arrived back at our house. I got out of the car, and with little interest in helping my mother unload the goods, I grabbed my balloon swarm and headed to the front door. Our stoop had 4 large steps before you arrived at the front door. I struggled with all of my might to wrangle a helium behemoth of balloons up what at the time seemed to be a mountain. When I finally got to the top step, I realized that I didn't have a free hand to actually get inside. I was perplexed, and I was unsure of what I was going to do to get out of this jam. Just when I was about to turn and ask my mom for help, I heard a low and booming voice. "Congratulations on the big day, Stephen. I'll help you out, son. Let me hold those balloons for you." I turned and looked at the man. He was tall and thin and had very fair skin. He was wearing a long black coat and a tall black dress hat. He had oily black hair that seeped out of the sides of the hat, but besides that, he seemed very well put together. His face, however, was not. He looked nervous, and it almost seemed like he was very sad. I didn't recognize him, but for some reason, I just assumed it was Alex's father. He was about the same height, had a similar voice, and since he was always wearing costumes, there was no telling what he was going to look like on a daily basis. Plus, he knew my name, and he knew I just returned from church. So it had to be him, right? I quickly convinced myself that it was probably Mr. Owl, so I said thank you, and I handed the balloons to the man. Now that I had a free hand, I started fishing around in my pockets to find my house key. Just as I managed to orient it correctly and slide it into the lock, I hear my mother yell, "The balloons!" I snapped my head around and I saw her pointing in the air. I slowly moved my eyes towards the sky and I could see my future as a crime-stopping vigilante fade into the heavens. They were gone. "Mr. Owl let him go," I yelled back. As I returned my eyes to where Alex's father was standing, there was nothing there. There was zero trace of the man that was standing next to me just seconds ago. "What are you talking about? Alex and Mr. Owl are out of town, you know that," my mom said. She was right. They weren't here. I immediately knew that there was no one standing next to me at the time. My body went cold and my heart sank. That scary-looking man in the hat was not a friend. I felt the breath leave my body as an immense weight was placed on my chest. I was frozen in place. I was snapped out of the trance by my mother, who by now was shaking my shoulders and trying to get me to snap out of it. I slowly regained control of my mind and my body, and I came to the realization that wasn't Mr. Owl. But who was it? How did this person know my name? Did this just happen to me? And where did he go? The memory of this day stayed with me into adulthood. As I had feared, I never did become a superhero. I could never quite explain what had happened on those steps. From time to time, the memory would play itself out in my thoughts, and I was always left with questions. I Googled "tall man in a black hat," and I was shocked by what I found. People all around the world had had ghostly encounters with a similar-looking man. I was not alone in my experience, and it finally made sense. I was visited by someone, or something, mischievous. I know all of this sounds far-fetched, and as someone who is inherently skeptical of any supernatural narrative, I can tell you that my experience was real. My life was changed that day. Every time I see a lonely balloon floating in the sky, I'm reminded of the tall man in the hat. My thoughts go out to the child who lost their present, but also may have gained an experience of a lifetime. The Midnight Run. I've been dating my girlfriend of 4 years, and we are madly in love. I will admit that over time, I have become a little comfortable with the relationship, and I've noticed that I've started to pack on a few extra pounds. Rachel is too nice of a person to actually say anything about it, but I noticed a few glances and comments here and there, and that kind of snapped me into reality. It was time for a change, so I started running after dinner to shed a few extra pounds. To be clear, I hate running. We live in New York City, so it's hard to find safe and traffic-free places to get some cardio in. Lately, I've been heading over to Belvedere Castle in Central Park and running laps around the nearby lake. Rachel hates that I run in the park at night. She always tells me how dangerous the park is and I shouldn't be there when the sun goes down. I appreciated the concern, but I was hoping that the end justified the means. There was no way I was going to shed the weight without a little disregard for comfort here and there. Rachel hosted a dinner party for some of her close friends, and I ate my fair share of heavenly fatty foods. As the day grew into the evening, the party started to dissipate. After all of our guests left for the night and we tidied up a bit, I was reflecting on how much I had eaten. My diet was ruined, and I was feeling a tad guilty. I decided to go for a run in the park. "Are you sure? It's getting really late. Why don't you just wait until tomorrow?" Rachel advised. I explained that it wasn't a big deal. It was only around 10 o'clock, and I would only be out for an hour or so. Rachel pressed her concern. "I don't like it. The park is dangerous at night." "I'll be fine," I said in my most confident and tough voice. I laced up my sneakers, grabbed a hoodie, and out I went. I know Rachel didn't want me to go, and I hate making her upset. But all of this work I had been doing was to make her happy. I most certainly didn't want to be out here running. I can assure you of that. Whether she knew it or not, I was doing this for her. I made it to the lake and I started my laps. It was a warm, breezy night, and for the most part, the park was empty. I was keeping a good pace, and my Fitbit was happy to report that my heart rate was in the cardio zone. A few minutes into my second lap, I heard a splash as if something had jumped, fallen, or had been thrown into the lake. I slowed my pace a little, and I scanned the lake, but I didn't see much of anything. A few yards further around the perimeter, I saw some water ripples. I stopped for a few seconds to look around, but it was still fairly peaceful. The air was silent, which is odd. As I continued, I was still thinking about the noise and the ripples. The whole situation was a bit weird, but stranger things have happened to me in New York. I picked up the pace in the third lap and I was really pushing myself to the limit. As I got around to the starting point, I saw some more ripples in the lake again. This time, there was also a trail of footsteps leading from the lake and down to an adjacent path. As much as I wanted to keep moving, I decided to change my route and follow the trail. I was not by any means a hero type, and I most certainly consider myself to be somewhat of a scaredy cat. To this day, I still don't know why I made that choice to go exploring. The footsteps led me to an underpass that was not too far away from the running trail. It was dark, except for a faded yellowish streetlight that was flickering ominously. I grabbed my glasses out of my pocket, and as I affixed my second pair of eyes, I can faintly make out the detail of a girl sitting on the ground. She was soaking wet, and it looked as though she was sobbing. Was she in the lake? Is she hurt? I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. I reported the girl's location and asked to send some help. Whatever was going on, I wanted backup. I wasn't sure how long it was going to take for help to arrive, so I switched on my phone's flashlight. The extra light helped me gather some of my courage. I approached her slowly and she continued to weep softly, almost like a child who had lost their parent. "Hey!" I called out as I crept closer. There was no response or acknowledgement of my presence. I really didn't want to get any closer, but I was drawn to find out what was going on. With my trusty cell phone lighting the way, I stepped closer and closer. She was completely soaked and her clothes were ratty and torn to shreds. The crying was continuous and eerie. My mind told me to stop and wait for the police, but something bad had happened and I wanted to help. When I got within arm's reach of the girl, I again tried to get her attention to no avail. The whole situation just didn't feel right. I wasn't going to get any closer. This is all just too weird, even for New York. Whatever was going on, she didn't want my help, so I was content with waiting for the emergency services to arrive. I began to step backward, and at that very moment, her crying stopped. "Hey," I said again, "are you okay?" The girl shook her head no. Her soaking wet blonde hair, snaking from side to side, flung ribbons of water in all directions. "What's wrong?" I asked. The girl, head down, spread her arms the way a child would when they want to be picked up. There was no way I was going to touch her, and I was even more creeped out than ever at this point. I took another step back. "Please?" said the girl in a soft and frightened voice. I was shocked and I froze. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to get any closer, but I wanted to help somehow. She began to slowly raise her head. I was terrified. What happened to this poor girl? What did she go through tonight? Her head continued to rise. I looked intently on in hopes that she would see that I was not going to hurt her, and I truly was there to help. But she couldn't see me. She couldn't see anything for that matter. There were two dark, black as night holes where her eyes should have been. When I looked at her face, I was immediately drawn into the black hole-like abyss. A chill instantly ran through my body. What have I stumbled upon? Am I the one in danger now? With shaking hands, I was able to gesture my camera app open and I snapped a picture. I needed proof of what was happening to me. As soon as the flash went off on my phone, the girl vanished into thin air without a trace. The puddle of water that she was sitting in was completely dry. "Hey you!" someone shouted. It was the police. They finally arrived. "We're looking for a lost girl that was sighted in the area. Have you seen her?" "It was me, officers. I called. There was a girl here, but she's gone now." I didn't even want to bring up what I really saw, because I'm not sure what actually happened. "Why are you wet? Were you in the lake?" said the officer. I looked down. I was soaking wet. But how? "Sir, were you in the lake?" I was frozen. I didn't know what to say. "We followed your tracks from the lake, sir. What's going on here?" "There was a girl here." "It's illegal to file a false report," one of the cops interrupted. "You're wasting the taxpayers' money." "I have a picture of her," I pleaded. I reached my phone, but it was ruined. The water completely killed my phone, and my proof was now destroyed. I quickly realized that I may in fact be losing my mind. I had no intention of getting hauled into jail that night, so I made up something on the fly. "Yeah, guys, I'm sorry. I guess I hit my head when I fell into the lake. I had a few drinks earlier at dinner, and I think I just need to head home. You want us to call you an ambulance? Said one of the cops. Nah, he's all right. Just get him out of here, said his partner. Besides, it's almost 4 a.m. I'm sure someone's waiting up for you. 4 a.m.? Where did the time go? It was only about 11 the last time I had checked. Rachel must be worried sick. I needed to get out of there. I apologized again for the misunderstanding and took off towards home. The run back was agonizing. My soaking clothes weighed me down, and my sneakers were waterlogged and squishing on every stride. How was I going to explain this to my girlfriend? There was no way she was going to believe me. Hell, I didn't even believe me. Who was that girl and what happened to her? How did I wind up in the lake, and how in the world did I lose 5 hours of my time like that? I'm just going to tell her what happened. If she thinks I'm crazy, then so be it. I already caused her enough pain by disappearing. I wouldn't want to add a lie on top of that. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what happened to me that night, but I do know one thing, fellas. Listen to your loved ones. If they tell you that running in Central Park at night is a bad idea, it may be best to just take their advice. I most certainly should have.